Beneath the Stone: How to Get Away with Murder. Detective Arthur Vance was a man who was always in control. He had built a career out of meticulous investigation, keen observation, and an uncanny ability to predict how people would react. Years of studying criminals, reading every psychological profile, and solving the darkest cases had honed his skills. He was known for his precision, but what no one knew was that Arthur Vance was also a man with a dark secret. He had become his own criminal. His wife, Marianne, had become a problem. She had once been the love of his life, a bright, radiant woman whose laughter could fill an entire room. But over the years, she had changed. Her emotional instability grew more pronounced, her sharp tongue sharper, and her unpredictable mood swings became unbearable. At first, he tried to help her, but soon he realized that he no longer loved her. He despised her. She had become a burden, a reminder of everything he resented about his life. Every day, she made him feel trapped, as if the walls were closing in and she was the one who held the key. For months, he planned. He watched her every move, learning her routine, her vulnerabilities, and the exact moment when she would be most vulnerable. Marianne, always the trusting wife, had no idea. She never suspected a thing. The final straw came one evening when Marianne, in one of her outbursts, threatened to expose some of Arthur's deepest secrets that could destroy his career, his reputation, and everything he had worked for. That night, he made a decision. It had taken him weeks to plan the perfect murder. Every detail was calculated, every move carefully thought out. He knew his job as a detective would work in his favor. He was an expert in forensic evidence, and he understood the subtleties of criminal investigations better than anyone. But he needed a way to make the body disappear. It had to be clever. It had to be clean. That's when he remembered the cemetery. Not just any cemetery, but the one near his childhood home, a place where the landscape had become all too familiar over the years. He had always found it oddly peaceful, and it had one thing that could help him: an empty grave. The cemetery had recently sold a plot to a family who had planned a funeral for the next day. Arthur had learned about it from his contacts at the funeral home. The grave was dug, the casket waiting to be placed inside. It was perfect, a hole that would be closed by the following morning, hiding whatever was placed inside it. A grave with no family members present, no mourners, just a quiet, peaceful setting where no one would ask questions. Arthur carefully executed his plan. Late that night, after Marianne had gone to bed, he drugged her drink, making sure she would be completely unconscious. He moved her body into the car and drove her to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. He had no hesitation, no remorse. He knew that he was doing what was necessary for his own survival. He parked the car near the cemetery's entrance and walked to the freshly dug grave. The workers had left the cemetery hours ago, and there were no witnesses. Arthur had a shovel in hand, and he began his work. He lowered Marianne's lifeless body into the grave, covering her with a layer of soil. But he didn't stop there. He needed to make sure the body was completely hidden. He carefully placed a few large stones on top of the grave, positioning them in such a way that they would blend seamlessly with the surrounding earth. When the grave was filled, Arthur stepped back, admiring his work. The hole was deep, the ground compacted, and no trace of Marianne's body remained visible. The cemetery would be the last place anyone would look. By the time the funeral took place, the ground would be solid, and no one would know the difference. Arthur returned home, washed up, and went to bed. He kept his composure, acting as though nothing had changed. The next day, he showed up to work, just like any other day, his demeanor calm, his mind focused. He played the role of the grieving husband perfectly, and no one suspected a thing. But as the days passed, the weight of his actions began to settle in. For the first time in years, Arthur felt something he hadn't experienced before: fear. He had been too clever, too sure of himself. He had thought the perfect plan would leave no room for error, but as the investigation into his wife's disappearance began to unfold, cracks started to show. Detective Vance was the one assigned to the case. He was calm, methodical, and unflappable. He followed the evidence with the precision of a seasoned investigator. The search for Marianne's body continued, but the investigation went cold. The autopsy was inconclusive. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence to suggest anything other than a missing persons case. Arthur's alibi was airtight, and his colleagues couldn't believe he was capable of such a thing. He had been the one to make all the right calls, the one who had found the clues when others had missed them. The pressure, however, was building. Arthur knew that one wrong move could expose him. He started to distance himself from his colleagues, to be more cautious in his interactions. He carefully monitored the progress of the investigation, keeping a close eye on the media coverage. No one seemed to suspect him, but the longer it went on, the more paranoid he became. He knew how investigations worked. The longer a case went unsolved, the more attention it drew. Soon, people would begin to ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. It was on the third week after Marianne's disappearance that he received the call. A team of forensic specialists had been brought in to dig up the grave at the cemetery. They had received an anonymous tip, a lead that suggested something was hidden beneath the earth. Arthur's heart raced as he heard the words. The hole in the cemetery was about to be disturbed. He spent the next few hours in a state of pure panic. He thought he had covered every angle, that the grave was foolproof, but now, he wasn't so sure. He needed to act quickly. Arthur didn't trust anyone. He knew his only chance to survive was to be the one to control the narrative. If anyone else found out what he had done, he would be finished. He rushed to the cemetery, arriving just as the forensic team began to remove the stones and unearth the grave. He watched from the shadows, heart pounding, as they dug into the earth. Each shovel of dirt that was removed made his stomach churn. Finally, they hit the coffin. Arthur's mind raced. What if they found something? What if the body was too decomposed, too recognizable? He had to do something. With quick thinking, Arthur approached one of the workers, pretending to be a concerned family member. He gave them a false story about a mistake with the grave, that the wrong plot had been dug up. He offered to pay them a bribe to avoid any further investigation into the site. The workers hesitated for a moment, but Arthur's authoritative presence and promise of a generous sum made them reconsider. They sealed the grave once more, packing up their equipment and leaving the scene. Arthur had won. For now. But deep down, Arthur knew that the game was far from over. He had hidden his crime, but the tension was unbearable. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, would eventually find the truth. And if they did, it would all come crashing down. In the silence of his own home, Arthur Vance would always carry the weight of the secret buried beneath the cemetery stone, knowing that in the end, even the perfect crime might one day find its way to the surface.